before the internet, before smartphones, before life came wrapped in bright, endless screens. There was the warm, quiet hum of a television set slowly coming to life. It was still dark outside, just barely morning. The house was hushed, the kind of silence that only existed in those fragile early hours when the world was still asleep. And somewhere in a small suburban living room in 1980s America, a young boy tiptoed barefoot across the linoleum floor, dragging his blanket like a cape behind him. He knew exactly how to turn on the TV without waking anyone up. First came the click of the knob. Then, that familiar electric buzz, the one that always came a second before the screen flickered to life in a soft, bluish glow. It wasn't instant, like the way things are now. It was slow. It was patient. It was earned. He'd curl into the couch, cocooned in his blanket, with knees tucked under his chin and eyes still half asleep. In that moment, the room around him disappeared. No traffic outside. No noise. Just the dim light of the television filling the room like a fireplace, and the quiet crackle of static before the morning cartoons began. There was something sacred about those mornings. The way time seemed to slow down. The way the cereal box on the coffee table became a companion. The way your heart would race just a little as the intro to your favorite show started playing. This was childhood. And for those who grew up in the 1980s, it wasn't just about cartoons or breakfast. It was about the rhythm of the era itself, where wonder wasn't on demand. It arrived like clockwork, and when it came, you savored it. Welcome to Sleepy Town Radio, a place where memories rest easy and stories drift gently through time. Here, we journey back to the sights, the sounds, and the small forgotten moments of everyday Americana, retold with a steady voice, soft pacing, and a warm sense of belonging. Whether you're here to relax, fall asleep, or simply remember, we're glad you found your way back. So let's begin this story right where imagination often started. With the flick of a thumb and a red plastic viewer held up to your eyes, a portal to another world, one frame at a time. The television hummed softly in the background, casting a gentle blue light across the living room carpet. Morning cartoons had come and gone, the cereal bowl was long empty, and the house had returned to its quiet rhythm. But for one small child curled up on the floor, adventure was far from over. Tucked beneath a cushion or resting quietly on a low shelf was a little red plastic viewer, chunky, durable, and shaped like a futuristic pair of binoculars. The Viewmaster. It fit perfectly in small hands. You'd hold it up to your face, press your eyes to the soft rubber eyepieces, and with the flick of a thumb, the real world would vanish. In its place, dinosaurs walking across a prehistoric plain. A lion crouched beneath the jungle canopy. A cowboy perched on a cliff overlooking Monument Valley. Each scene more vivid than the last. It didn't glow, it didn't move, it didn't beep or buzz or flash, but it didn't have to. The images, tiny, translucent, and perfectly backlit by sunlight, held their own kind of magic. Three-dimensional illusions that made your young heart race and your imagination wander off far beyond the walls of your house. Every reel was a journey. There were some you liked, and there were some you loved. The Grand Canyon, Bugs Bunny, NASA, classic fairy tales, national parks, educational series, cartoon adventures. The choices were endless, and each click of the lever felt like stepping into a different world. And what made it so special, so intensely personal, was that the Viewmaster wasn't something you shared. Not really. It didn't pass around like a toy. It was yours. A secret window, just for you. You didn't need permission to use it. You didn't need batteries. You didn't need anyone to explain how it worked. You just looked and you believed. Children in the 1980s understood something that's been lost in the noise of modern life. Wonder doesn't always have to shout. Sometimes it just quietly invites you in. Those little cardboard reels, round and white with tiny slides pressed into them, felt like treasure. You'd collect them, stack them, protect them. Some came in small envelopes with bold titles. Others arrived in souvenir packs from faraway places. Gift shops, national monuments, amusement parks. And if you were lucky, your favorite reel would somehow survive for years, eventually rediscovered in a shoebox or attic drawer, bringing it all rushing back in one quick glance. What's funny is how clear those scenes still feel in the mind. Even now, decades later, you might remember the elephant walking toward the camera, or the astronaut reaching out into space. You might remember the way the images would seem to float, layered in space like dioramas behind glass. You remember tilting the viewer ever so slightly to catch the light just right, because you knew the scene wouldn't look quite the same if it was too dark or too bright. And the sound. Do you remember that? The small, satisfying click of the reel shifting into place. The gentle resistance of the lever beneath your thumb. The soft tension and then the release. That quiet, tactile joy that told you, yes, a new scene is ready. In those moments, nothing else mattered. The dishes in the sink, the distant phone ringing, the chores you were supposed to do. They all faded. You weren't a child sitting on the carpet anymore. You were a traveler, a time tripper, a quiet explorer drifting through frozen worlds that waited just for you, and it never once asked you to rush. The Viewmaster taught you how to slow down, how to notice details, how to be still and take in each frame like a painting, before the next one came clicking into place. It was the opposite of overstimulation. It was focus in its most childlike and beautiful form. There's something about that kind of solitude that stays with you, something about those hushed afternoons, lost in quiet reel viewing, that becomes a kind of memory shelter, one you revisit when the world feels too loud. And maybe that's the thing. Maybe what made the Viewmaster so magical wasn't just the images it showed you, but the space it gave you to dream. After traveling through miniature real worlds in the palm of your hand, something changed. The room was the same, the quiet still there. But now the adventure had a voice. And not just any voice. It was robotic, slightly stilted, both oddly mechanical and strangely comforting, like a future whispering from inside a toy. Its case was bright orange, almost like a safety cone for your imagination. The keys were soft and rubbery, with rounded edges made just for little fingers. There was a screen, tiny, red-lit and blinking, almost as if it was thinking right alongside you. It was called Speak and Spell, and for many children of the 1980s, this wasn't just a gadget. It was a glimpse into something powerful, something smart, something that felt like it knew your name, even if it could only say, Bell, Elephant. This little device didn't just talk. It taught. It challenged. And it made you feel for the first time like a machine could be your tutor, your test, and your cheerleader all at once. It had no face, but it spoke to you. And that was enough. You'd power it on, and there was that sound. Soft static, followed by a robotic voice that seemed to echo inside your ears. Spell, photograph. You'd tap out each letter on the rubber keys with careful fingers, holding your breath like the stakes were higher than they really were. Get it right, and the voice praised you. Get it wrong, and that unmistakable buzz sounded off like a red alert in a spaceship. Sometimes it felt like the toy was judging you, other times like it believed in you more than anyone else in the room. But what mattered most was that it made learning feel like magic. This wasn't homework. It wasn't a teacher at the front of the class. It was you and this strange plastic rectangle that talked back. And in that space you weren't just a kid. You were a genius in training. There were no wires, no Wi-Fi. Just the simple satisfaction of spelling a word correctly and hearing that flat, monotone voice tell you, "That is correct." For some kids, speak and spell was the first time they'd ever interacted with a machine that responded. It was a toy, yes, but it carried the illusion of intelligence. And back then, that illusion was everything. It felt like the future. You might have carried it around like a calculator, pretending to take important notes. You might have taken it into your fort made of couch cushions and whispered answers in secret. You might have sat with it on your lap during a road trip, spelling out silly words just to pass the time. And when you were alone, when the rest of the house was asleep or distracted, you might have powered it on. Not to learn, not to win, but just to hear that voice again. Just to be reminded that something was listening, that something would answer. In a decade before smartphones, before Alexa, before touchscreen learning tools, this was cutting edge, this was tech. And to a child in the 1980s, holding a speak and spell was like cradling tomorrow. The machine itself had its quirks. The screen would fade if the batteries were low. The buttons would sometimes stick. But none of that mattered, because speak and spell didn't need perfection to spark imagination. It just needed to be there. Looking back, it's easy to forget how impressive it all felt. But that's the beauty of memory. We don't always remember the specifics. We remember the feeling of being a little bit smarter, a little more capable, a little more ready. And when you finally spelled encyclopedia right, or whatever your childhood Everest was, it wasn't just about letters. It was a win. A real, glowing, robotic-voiced win. Speak and Spell didn't just teach spelling. It taught confidence. It taught independence. It taught kids that the future could live on their bedroom floor and talk back. And maybe that's why we remember it so fondly. Because in an age of noise and color and chaos, one little orange box reminded us that knowledge, like magic, could be simple, small, and whispered in plastic. If there was one object that defined childhood in the 1980s, one thing that seemed to hold not just paper and pencils, but your entire personality, it was the Trapper Keeper. Long before smartphones or social media, self-expression came in the form of a bright vinyl-covered binder that closed with a satisfying Velcro flap. Some had neon lightning bolts. Others had pastel unicorns or pixelated grids that looked like something out of an early computer simulation. But no matter the design, carrying a Trapper Keeper felt like carrying a piece of yourself. It was loud, it was proud, and it was yours. At the start of every school year, a quiet kind of excitement would buzz through the aisles of local drugstores and Walmarts. Children would kneel before the shelves like it was a sacred altar, flipping through the options. each Trapper Keeper was more than school supply. It was a statement. Choosing the right one felt like choosing the cover art of your story for the year ahead. Inside, the plastic folders snapped in with crisp, clean rings, holding math homework, love notes, and half-finished doodles from a boring history class. The folders came in colors that almost glowed: electric blue, banana yellow, hot pink, and each one seemed to promise a fresh start. There was a specific joy in opening that binder and hearing the crackle of the Velcro. It was the sound of being prepared, being organized, being a little bit cooler than you were the year before. Trapper Keepers weren't just practical. They were magical in how they gathered up the chaos of adolescence and filed it neatly behind dividers labeled math, English, social studies, and stuff. The last tab was always the most interesting, the one filled with stickers, secret lists, game scorecards, and maybe even a folded magazine clipping of your favorite pop star. For many, the Trapper Keeper was also a shield. You could hold it against your chest in the hallway, clutch it like armor. In a world where reputations were built or broken by the contents of your lunchbox or the brand of shoes you wore, having a cool Trapper Keeper gave you a little confidence. It gave you a little edge. Teachers didn't always love them. Some said they were noisy, distracting, too bulky for small desks. But students defended them like they were prized possessions. And in many ways, they were. The Velcro, oh, that Velcro, was a sound that echoed through classrooms like a zipper in the quiet of a library. It was part of the rhythm of the school day. It ripped open at the start of every class and sealed shut with purpose when the bell rang. If you were lucky, yours stuck well. If not, you'd have to press it down a few extra times, willing it to hold on just a little longer. Over time, the once smooth covers would get worn and bubbled at the corners. Doodles would appear in pen, names of crushes, favorite band logos, maybe a quick sketch of Garfield. The Velcro might lose some of its grip, but the binder itself somehow gained weight, not physically but emotionally. It was full of a year's worth of little moments, of friendships, of anxiety, of inside jokes and hastily scribbled homework answers. There's something strangely tender about the memory of those binders. How they were so bright and bold, yet so personal and private. How they seemed to hold more than just paper. They held a version of you, a fourth grade you, or sixth grade you, trying to make sense of the world, one subject tab at a time. And today, if you're lucky enough to stumble upon one at a yard sale or hidden in a box in the attic, opening it again can feel like flipping through an old diary. One Velcro rip, and you're back in that fluorescent-lit classroom, sitting at a desk too small for your knees, listening to the hum of the overhead projector, and wondering what would be for lunch. Yes, it was just a school supply, but it was also a time capsule. And for a generation growing up in the 1980s, the Trapper Keeper didn't just keep papers, it kept memories. As childhoods were organized and color-coded inside Trapper Keepers, the rest of life unfolded just as carefully, pressed between plastic reels and magnetic tape. Blank VHS cassettes weren't merely tools for recording television shows. In 1980s America, they became time machines. Time machines that hummed softly and blinked a red light in the living room, quietly preserving the ordinary magic of growing up. Families didn't just watch TV, they captured it. Someone, often a parent or older sibling, would sit by the VCR, remote in hand, eyes sharp, finger poised to hit record the moment the opening credits rolled, and when the tape ran out, they'd flip it or swap it, labeling the plastic spine in neat Sharpie ink. DuckTales, 3 episodes plus McDonald's commercial. Or Movie Night, The Wizard Pizza Hut ad. Each tape was like a scrapbook of sound and picture. The Disney Channel logo flickering across the screen. The warm static that appeared just before a show started. And, oh, the commercials. Those were half the treasure. Ads for Capri Sun, Skip It, or that one jingle about the Happy Meal that never quite left your head. They weren't interruptions. They were part of the ritual, the rhythm of home. Watching these tapes wasn't a solitary act. It was communal. It was ritual. Friday nights often meant everyone gathered around the television, popcorn in a big bowl, dim lights casting soft shadows. The VCR would whir to life and someone would say, "Start it from the beginning." That was the moment the room hushed. Everyone settled in, kids wrapped in blankets, parents relaxing on the couch, and the stories would unfold. Re-watching old tapes felt like visiting old friends. You knew exactly when the volume dipped because someone had answered the phone during the original recording. You remembered that jump in static where your little brother accidentally hit pause, and you could almost recite the commercials along with the characters, word for word. There was something oddly comforting about the imperfections. The hiss of the tape, the occasional tracking line at the bottom of the screen, the slightly muffled audio. These flaws weren't bugs, they were fingerprints. They made the memory feel more real. Blank VHS tapes were blank only once. The moment they entered the VCR and the red light turned on, they began collecting pieces of your life. Birthday parties recorded over faded cartoons. A talent show captured between episodes of Full House. Sometimes you'd stumble on a tape months later and discover a surprise. Something you'd forgotten even happened. And when the tape reached the end, it didn't stop. It rewound. A quiet little whirring hum, as if the past itself was winding backward waiting for you to visit again. The act of recording wasn't just technical. It was sacred. It was someone saying, "This matters. Let's keep this." And in an age before streaming, before endless access, it meant something to hold on to a moment, to make it permanent, even if it lived on something as fragile as magnetic tape. Parents passed down not just family values, but episodes of The Muppet Show, Knight Rider, or Reading Rainbow. And kids, in return, would record their own stories, puppet shows performed in the living room, school concerts, impromptu dance routines. It was documentation, yes, but it was also legacy. By the end of the decade, shelves were filled with tapes, stacked in haphazard rows, some with cracked cases, others missing labels. You had to guess what was inside. Was it The Little Mermaid or your cousin's birthday? You didn't always know, and that was part of the magic. Blank VHS tapes may have started empty, but they never stayed that way for long. They were filled with the hum of everyday life, with laughs and quiet moments, with shows that brought the family together and commercials that stayed in your head far longer than they had any right to. And just like the Trapper Keeper in your backpack, those tapes quietly held the story of you. From the glow of the TV screen to the flicker of recorded images on tape, the 1980s were a decade obsessed with preserving the moment. But sometimes even the most cherished memories came wrapped in a plastic cartridge, waiting for someone to press play. And as those tapes rewound, so did we, preparing ourselves once again for the next chapter of childhood discovery. A chapter that, for many kids, unfolded in front of a different kind of screen, one that taught us about wagon trains, snake bites, and how a single decision could mean survival or loss. In a time when screens were mostly reserved for family movie nights and Saturday morning cartoons, a new kind of experience quietly crept into classrooms. One that mixed education with pixels, history with heartbreak. It came on a floppy disk, it booted slowly, and its soundtrack was the faint hum of a computer monitor. It was the Oregon Trail. At first glance, it looked like a game. And for a fourth grader sitting in a dimly lit school computer lab, that's exactly what it felt like. A frontier adventure where you could name your own party members, load up a virtual wagon, and try to cross the American wilderness. It was fun. It was different. And then, someone in your wagon got dysentery. Suddenly, things got real. Unlike other games of the time, the Oregon Trail didn't reward you with high scores or flashy graphics. Instead, it asked you to make decisions. Real decisions, tough ones. Do you ford the river or pay the ferry? Hunt for food or ration your supplies? Rest a few more days or push ahead knowing winter was closing in? And every choice had weight. It was often the first time a child encountered the concept of death outside of fairy tales or movies. You could lose your best friend because you didn't pack enough medicine. You could watch your little sister vanish into a simple text line. Emily has died of cholera. Just like that. No music, no explanation. Just silence. And yet, kids kept playing. There was something oddly compelling about the challenge. The rawness, the unpredictability. For many, it was their first taste of simulated consequence. They learned, perhaps for the first time, that not everything turns out okay. That life on the trail was hard. That planning ahead mattered. That sometimes, even when you did everything right, something or someone could still be lost. It wasn't just about history. It was about empathy. In the game, you could be a banker from Boston or a farmer from Illinois. You started with more money or fewer supplies, and that affected your odds. For a generation of school kids, it was a quiet introduction to the idea that not everyone starts life on equal footing. A powerful lesson, tucked inside an old-school interface. Teachers called it educational software. But for the kids huddled around those green and black screens, it was more than that. It was emotional, memorable, sometimes even heartbreaking. And maybe, just maybe, it left a deeper impression than any textbook ever did. Even decades later, just the mention of the Oregon Trail stirs something. A flash of memory, the blinking cursor, the crude pixel artwork of an oxen wagon, the pop-up message announcing the dreaded fate of another party member. And somewhere in the back of your mind, the reflexive whisper, "You have died of dysentery." Yet, in between those hard lessons, there was joy, too. The satisfaction of reaching the Willamette Valley, the relief of crossing a river without losing your supplies, the pride of making it through the harsh journey, against the odds, despite the setbacks. It wasn't just about survival. It was about resilience. And when you left the lab and returned to your regular classroom, you carried something with you. A little more awareness, a little more thoughtfulness, maybe even a spark of gratitude. Because life at home, with microwaves and warm beds and VCRs recording Saturday cartoons, felt just a little sweeter after a simulated winter on the plains. From recording memories on VHS tapes to watching virtual families struggle through unforgiving terrain, the 1980s had a way of mixing the personal with the profound, of turning play into perspective. And just as the screen flickered off and you pushed in your plastic chair, another kind of anticipation began to build. Because Friday night was coming. And in homes across the country, one special ritual waited: an outdated telephone number, a notepad, and the voice of a stranger reading out every movie playing that weekend. Before streaming queues, before digital guides, before anyone ever asked Alexa or Googled a title, there was the movie hotline. It was a quiet ritual that began late in the week, sometime on a Friday afternoon or early Saturday morning, when the weekend air felt just a little bit lighter. Maybe Dad had finished mowing the lawn, or Mom was in the kitchen starting spaghetti. And somewhere in the corner of the house, an old rotary phone waited patiently, its receiver resting atop the cradle, its coiled cord stretched and tangled from years of conversations. For families across America, that phone was the key to unlocking weekend magic. The process began with a number, usually scribbled down on a slip of paper taped near the fridge, or simply memorized from calling it so often. You'd dial it, one digit at a time, and wait through the soft, rhythmic click of the rotary returning to place. And then you'd hear it. A pre-recorded voice on the other end, clear and cheerful, delivering a list of every movie showing at your local theater that weekend. At the majestic Twin Theater now playing, and then the titles would come. Slowly, methodically, as if each one deserved a moment to shine. The voice might list the times, 6:45, 8:30, maybe a Saturday matinee at 2:15. You'd listen carefully, pen in hand, jotting it all down on the back of a junk mail envelope or the corner of the TV guide. Sometimes the voice would pause. There'd be a gentle hiss of the tape rewinding or starting over. If you missed something, or if the listing played too fast, you'd simply hang up, dial again, and listen all over. It wasn't instant. It wasn't flashy. But it felt like something special, like uncovering a secret. For kids, it was often the first real responsibility of the weekend. Mom might ask you to call and see if E.T. was still playing. Dad might want to know if there was anything not animated showing. And so you'd become the movie scout, standing tall by the kitchen phone, a pencil behind your ear, ready to deliver the news. There was excitement in the air, more than just the movies themselves. It was the promise of popcorn, of driving past the glowing marquee, of sitting together in the dark theater as the previews rolled and the hush fell over the room. It was about being together. Even for families who didn't go out, the movie hotline was still part of the rhythm. You'd call just to hear what was out there, what was happening, what stories were playing across town that weekend. Sometimes the titles would spark conversations. We should go see that. Or, I remember watching that when I was your age. And other times, the call wasn't about going at all. It was about dreaming, because the truth is, not every weekend meant a trip to the theater. Some weekends meant folding laundry, eating leftovers, and curling up on the couch. But the call still happened. The list still played. And for a few moments, it was enough just to imagine sitting in the soft red seats, holding a tub of popcorn, waiting for the lights to dim. Even the act of dialing felt nostalgic. The sound of the rotary wheel clicking, the way you had to be patient and deliberate. You couldn't rush the process. You had to listen. You had to wait. In a world that would soon be defined by speed, that quiet slowness had its own kind of grace. And if you were lucky, if everything lined up just right, the evening would unfold in that most perfect way. Jackets zipped up, tickets bought, candy smuggled in from home, and the whole family together, watching shadows dance across a silver screen. The voice on the hotline may have been pre-recorded, but to many it became familiar, comforting, like a small friend who checked in each weekend, one who told you what was new, what was coming, and what was worth circling on the calendar. And now, thinking back, that voice is gone. The number likely disconnected, the theaters replaced, the rotary phones long retired, but the ritual remains, tucked quietly in the corners of memory, as soft and comforting as the glow of a marquee on a cool Saturday night. And just as the phone was returned to its cradle and the notepad tucked away, the family would begin to gather, maybe around a television set this time, preparing for a different kind of show. One not in theaters, but still filled with wonder, still meant to be shared, because next came a different kind of movie magic, the kind made for TV. After the call had been made and the movie listing scribbled down, sometimes, just sometimes, there wasn't a theater trip to be had. Maybe money was tight that week, or Dad had to work late. Maybe the car wouldn't start, or there was a soft rain falling that made everyone want to stay in. But none of that mattered, because in the 1980s, magic didn't only happen at the movies. It happened right there in the living room. There was a kind of hush that fell across the house on those special nights when a made-for-TV movie was about to air. The whole day seemed to revolve around it. Chores were done early, dinner was wrapped up before dark, and the living room transformed, just for a while, into something close to sacred. Blankets were dragged in, pillows tossed on the floor. Someone made popcorn in a big aluminum pot, shaking it over the stovetop until the kernels danced. There were no microwaves yet, not in every house, and even if there were, somehow stovetop popcorn always tasted better, saltier, warmer, more real. And then came the lights. One by one, they were switched off until the glow of the TV screen became the only thing illuminating the room. That old console set, sitting heavy on the carpet, buzzing softly as the channel dial clicked into place. NBC, CBS, ABC, the big three. The broadcast always began with a special announcement, a dramatic voiceover, maybe even a sweeping title sequence with strings swelling behind it. And suddenly, it was showtime. For a generation of kids, these weren't just TV movies. They were events. Titles like The Ewok Adventure, Flight of the Navigator, or The Day After weren't simply entertainment. They were moments that marked time. You didn't DVR them. You didn't stream them later. If you missed them, you missed them. That finality gave them weight. Families leaned in close. Parents on the couch, kids lying belly down on the floor, their chins resting on their hands. Someone always whispered, "Shh," just as the dialogue began. And for the next 2 hours there were no phones, no interruptions, no rewinds. Just a shared experience. Sometimes the stories were light-hearted, full of wonder and whimsy. Alien creatures, magical forests, impossible adventures. Other times they were heavy, even haunting. Movies like The Day After, which imagined the aftermath of nuclear war, left grown-ups shaken and children full of questions. And yet they watched. Together. Because that was the heart of it. Not the story, not the stars, but the togetherness. In those brief windows of time, the living room became something more. A theater, a classroom, a campfire circle, a place where emotions were shared and memories made, where children felt the weight of grown-up stories and grown-ups remembered what it felt like to be moved by something as simple as a flickering screen. Even commercials took on a rhythm of their own. Families would stretch during the breaks, refill popcorn bowls, talk about what just happened in the movie. And when the film returned, everyone settled back in, almost instinctively, like birds finding their place in a nest. And then, just as it had begun, it ended. The credits rolled, the screen dimmed. Someone reached for the remote or walked over to click the knob. The room stayed quiet for a moment. Not out of obligation, but out of reflection. No one said much. Maybe a soft, "That was good," or "Remember that part when..." But mostly it was quiet. A satisfied quiet. A kind of glow that lingered in the corners of the room and carried into bedtime. Years later, people wouldn't always remember the title of the movie or who starred in it. But they'd remember the feeling, the warmth, the closeness, the taste of salt on their fingertips, the hum of the TV, the steady breathing of a parent sitting beside them. It was magic. Not because it was perfect, but because it was shared. And just as the night wound down and the screen faded to black, the world outside seemed a little darker, a little quieter. But in the minds of those children, images danced still. Spaceships, lost boys, distant galaxies. Stories planted deep in hearts that would one day grow nostalgic for that very moment. But not all broadcasts were so gentle, because every so often the screen would fade to black and return with a message, a frying pan, an egg, a voice that said, "This is your brain on drugs." After the last scene faded and the credits rolled, the room still held a hush. Maybe the family was still gathered on the couch, the popcorn bowl nearly empty, the soft hum of the TV filling the silence. And then, without warning, the screen went black. Not for long. A frying pan appeared, then an egg, and a stern voice declared, "This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs." The sizzle that followed wasn't just meant to mimic cooking. It was meant to scorch itself into memory. Public service announcements, PSAs, were everywhere in the 1980s. In the middle of cartoons, between commercials, tacked onto the end of after-school specials. They weren't designed to entertain. They were designed to stop you in your tracks. And they did. There was a certain abruptness to them. One moment you were watching He-Man battle Skeletor, or the Ewoks race through the forest. The next, the screen cut to grainy footage, somber music, and a message that felt almost too real. Too raw. Only you can prevent forest fires. Don't talk to strangers. Just say no. They weren't asking, they were telling. For a generation growing up in the shadow of Cold War fears, rising crime, and the growing war on drugs, PSAs were the echoing voice of concern. The grown-up world, breaking through the static of childhood, trying, desperately, to reach young ears and young minds. The images lingered. A puppet being offered drugs by a slick-talking peer, a teenager vanishing from a park bench, a cigarette burning down as a child coughed in slow motion. These weren't subtle metaphors. They were designed to leave a mark. And they did. Even now, all these years later, many still remember the music, the voices, the feelings they stirred. Not fear exactly, but a certain awareness. A sense that danger might be closer than we thought, that the world wasn't always as safe as our living rooms made it seem. Yet there was something oddly comforting about them too. Maybe it was the repetition. the way the messages returned again and again, like familiar mile markers on a long drive. Or maybe it was the belief, true or not, that someone out there cared enough to warn us. Because warnings at their core come from a place of protection. And for kids of the 1980s, PSAs became part of the backdrop of life, woven in between episodes, hiding among serial commercials, whispering from beneath the glow of the screen. Some were startling, others were oddly gentle. There was a campaign where kids were encouraged to talk to their parents. Another where a girl with big glasses and braces told viewers, "Nobody's perfect." And then the unforgettable tagline, "The more you know," accompanied by a shooting star and a soft melodic chime. That jingle still lives in the heads of those who heard it. Of course, some messages missed their mark. Some frightened more than they educated. Others became the stuff of parody years later. But in the moment, they felt serious. They felt real. They made you pause. They made you think. And they reminded you that television wasn't always just for fun. Sometimes it was a classroom, a guidepost, a warning. Looking back, it's easy to smile at the dramatics, the overacting, the grainy footage, the melodramatic voiceovers, but beneath all that was an earnest attempt to steer a generation, to protect them, to arm them with knowledge. And for all their flaws, those messages stuck. They became phrases parents repeated, posters on school walls, topics in classroom discussions, seeds planted deep, growing quietly in the minds of children who may not have fully understood, but who definitely remembered. And so, nestled between stories of Ewoks and cartoon bears, were messages of survival, of choice, of morality. And in their own way, they became part of the story of growing up. The screen fades again. Another commercial, maybe a cereal ad, maybe a toy. And then the color returns. The music rises. It's Saturday morning now, and something magical is about to begin. Because after the warnings, after the heavy moments, came joy. Pure, sweet, animated joy. After the heavy warnings and solemn voices had faded from the screen, the weekend brought something altogether different. It brought magic. Saturday mornings in the 1980s were more than just a time slot. They were a ritual, a celebration, a sacred window of joy reserved solely for children. Long before the sun had fully risen, and long before any grown-up had even considered getting out of bed, kids across America were already awake, blinking sleep from their eyes, tugging on pajama sleeves and padding down the hallway toward the television. There was something special about the hush of a house at that hour. The world outside was still quiet. The roads were empty, the sky still pale. The only sounds were the soft hum of a refrigerator, the gentle creak of the floor, and that familiar static buzz of a TV warming up. With a few clicks of the dial, the screen would glow to life, flickering in the early morning dark like a beacon. And then it began. A kaleidoscope of color, a burst of music, a parade of voices. The Smurfs, G.I. Joe, He-Man, She-Ra, the Transformers, the Ninja Turtles. Heroes of all shapes and sizes filled the screen, their stories unfolding in 30-minute bursts of excitement, silliness, and heart. But cartoons were only half the equation. The other half was cereal. Boxes of Fruit Loops, Cap'n Crunch, Cocoa Pebbles, and Lucky Charms lined the kitchen shelves like treasures. Kids would pour them into bowls, far too much always, then splash milk on top and race back to the living room before the next episode started. Somewhere, someone would spill milk on the carpet. Someone else would fight over who got to sit closer to the screen. But no one wanted to miss a single second, because this was the moment, the one part of the week that truly felt like it belonged just to them. No school, no chores, no news, no adult programming, just animation and imagination. Good versus evil, robots in disguise, magical kingdoms and space adventures. Lessons tucked inside each episode, sure, but mostly just fun. And there was something warm about knowing that all across the country, millions of other kids were doing the exact same thing. A shared joy, quietly connecting living rooms from Maine to California. In those hours, cereal spoons clicked against bowls while laser battles lit up the screen. Villains cackled, heroes triumphed, and laugh tracks filled the room. Kids shouted along with theme songs, quoted their favorite lines, imitated cartoon voices, danced during commercial breaks. And those commercials, oh, they were a world of their own. Flashy jingles for sugary cereals, neon-colored toys, and breakfast pastries. Every break brought a new temptation, a new wish for next week's grocery run. By mid-morning, the spell would slowly start to break. The cartoons would fade. A cooking show might begin, or a local news update. Parents would emerge from bedrooms blinking in the light, wondering how long the TV had been on. The bowls would be empty, the living room slightly messy, the magic gently fading like a dream. But for those few hours, the world had belonged to children. Looking back, it wasn't just about the cartoons. It was about the feeling, the freedom, the innocence, the sense that even just for a little while you could lose yourself in laughter, in color, in story. No one paused the show. No one fast-forwarded through the boring parts. You watched what was on when it was on, and that made it feel more special, more fleeting, like a secret you had to be awake to catch. And you always were, because there was no alarm clock needed on Saturday mornings in the 80s. Just the pull of adventure, the promise of your favorite show, the rustle of cereal bags, and the quiet thrill of turning the TV on before the grown-ups stirred. It was a kind of magic we didn't even realize was magic. Not until it was gone. And even now, decades later, the memory lingers. Like the echo of a theme song you haven't heard in years, but still somehow know by heart. As the final cartoon credits rolled and the cereal bowl stood empty on the coffee table, something else began to linger in the air. Something short, catchy, and oddly unforgettable. It was the jingles. Little bursts of melody and rhyme that slipped into our ears between episodes, then settled deep in our memories, often to stay for good. They were never long, never complex, but somehow they were perfect. Just a few bars of music, a simple line or two of lyrics, and suddenly you were singing along, whether you meant to or not. I don't want to grow up. I'm a Toys R Us kid. That one line alone could launch you back to an entire aisle of plastic dreams. Rows of blinking robots, pink Barbie convertibles, aisles echoing with squeaky wheels on tile floors. It didn't matter if you actually went to Toys R Us that weekend. The jingle was enough. It planted the seed. It gave you the feeling of possibility. Jingles were more than commercials. They were part of the culture, part of the rhythm of being a kid in the 80s. Each one a small song, bright, infectious, and impossibly sticky. There was a tune for everything. My buddy, my buddy. Wherever I go, he goes. Give me a break, give me a break. Break me off a piece of that Kit Kat bar. Meow, 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 meow. Even the nonsense ones stuck, maybe especially those. And it wasn't just the kids. Parents hummed them too, usually without realizing. While folding laundry or driving to the grocery store, you might catch a tune under their breath. Some jingles made the entire house feel like a musical. One minute it was cartoons. The next it was a choir of voices chanting about Pop-Tarts or Life cereal or juicy fruit gum. In some ways, jingles were time capsules. They told you what the world looked like and what it wanted to be. A world where breakfast was exciting, where every toy had a theme song, and where kids had the power to choose. Between brands, between flavors, between adventures. Some of the jingles carried lessons, too, wrapped in sugar and sound. You learned that reading was magical, that seatbelts saved lives, that brushing your teeth could be fun, all taught not by grown-ups, but by animated mascots and sing-song slogans. They came from smiling voices, catchy tunes, and endless repetition until the message simply became part of you. And because you heard them so often, day after day, week after week, they became like old friends. Comforting, familiar, always there in the background, adding color to the routine. It wasn't unusual for a kid to sing a jingle in the schoolyard, or at recess, or while biking through the neighborhood. Entire groups would start chanting the words to a favorite ad, not out of irony, but joy. And it all felt so normal back then, so natural. We didn't question why we remembered every note from the Big Mac song, or why the image of a claymation California raisin dancing to Motown could make us smile even now. Because that was the power of a good jingle. It wasn't just meant to sell, it was meant to stick. And decades later, long after the toys have disappeared from store shelves, after the brands have changed, and the jingles have vanished from TV, those little songs still live in us. They come back when you least expect them, on a quiet drive or a walk through an old grocery store aisle. A flash of melody, a whisper of childhood, and suddenly, you're there again. Sitting cross-legged on the carpet, a spoon in one hand, a smile on your face, and a jingle humming softly in your head, like a lullaby only you remember. After the jingles faded and the Saturday morning commercials quieted down, something else would take hold in the heart of a child from the 1980s, a different kind of sound, less polished, more raw, but deeply personal. It was the radio, not just background noise, not just something playing in the car. No, this was the soundtrack to growing up. And for a certain kind of kid, the one with a blank cassette, a steady finger, and a quiet obsession, it became a mission. The mixtape mission. It usually started in the bedroom. A small clock radio, or maybe a boombox balanced on a nightstand. Static flickering across the dial. That soft green glow behind the numbers. And, next to it, a cassette. Already in the deck. Ready. This was not passive listening. It was vigilance. Eyes on the radio, hand hovering over the record and play buttons, already half-pressed, waiting for that one song, the one you heard once, maybe twice, and couldn't stop thinking about. Maybe it was Whitney Houston. Maybe it was REO Speedwagon. Maybe it was something newer, Prince or Madonna or the newest from Phil Collins. Whatever it was, it never came fast. And it never came announced. You had to earn it. So you'd sit, flipping through your notebook or fiddling with a Rubik's Cube, pretending not to care, But every time a DJ's voice dipped and the opening notes of a song began, your heart would skip. Was it the one? And if it was, there was no time to hesitate. Record, play, fingers down. But then, always the fear. Would the DJ talk over the intro? Would they keep talking halfway into the first verse? Would the weather report land right over your favorite chorus? You never really got a clean version. Not truly. There was always a little bleed at the beginning, a clipped word, a commercial echo, or your mom yelling your name from the kitchen just as the bridge kicked in. But somehow, that made it even more yours. Each mixtape was unique, handcrafted, imperfect, and filled with longing. You'd label them with Bic pens and stickers, Hits Volume 1 or Summer Jams 86, even if it took all summer to fill just one side. The spine of the cassette case would carry your handwriting like a personal signature, and playing it back later, you could remember exactly where you were when you caught each song. The one you recorded while lying on the floor. The one that played during a thunderstorm. The one you stayed up late for on a school night. They weren't just playlists, they were diaries in disguise. And if you made one for someone else, a best friend, a crush, a cousin, it became a kind of secret message. Each track chosen carefully, each transition considered. You didn't say what the songs meant, but they meant something. Mixtapes taught patience, they taught attention, and they taught you to listen closely. You learned the rhythm of the radio, the way DJs spoke, the time between commercials, even the best windows to record clean intros. You started to understand music in a new way, not just what sounded good, but what felt right together. And long before playlists were made with clicks or algorithms, there was this: 2 fingers, a blank tape, and a quiet Saturday afternoon. Years later, some of those cassettes would resurface in cardboard boxes or dusty drawers. The tape a little warped, the handwriting faded. But press play, and the time would return. You could hear your younger self just beneath the music, that mix of hope and effort and joy. You could remember how it felt to chase something small and catch it. And in a world that's gotten faster, louder, and more disposable, there's something gentle in remembering those moments, when all you needed was a tape, a radio, and a song that felt like yours. After the hushed excitement of recording your own mixtape, curating each song like a secret, there was another kind of music ritual that belonged only to the 1980s. One that came quietly, not through speakers, but through your mailbox. It started with a small, glossy flyer, maybe tucked inside a magazine or slipped into your parents' newspaper. Bright colors, big block letters, and a promise too good to ignore. 12 tapes for just 1 penny. To a kid or teen back then, it felt like magic or mischief, or maybe a bit of both. The Columbia House ad was like a ticket to your own private concert collection. Dozens of cassette tapes, shrink-wrapped and pristine, each one filled with the voices and rhythms that filled your days. Journey, Huey Lewis, Madonna, Def Leppard, Lionel Richie, The Police. Their album covers displayed like candy, neatly arranged in a grid, waiting to be chosen. You'd sit at the kitchen table, pen in hand, circling numbers, picking the perfect 12. It wasn't just about music, it was a reflection of you. Your favorites, your mood, your moment in time. Then came the ritual of filling out the form, writing your name in blocky letters. carefully sticking that shiny penny to the reply card with Scotch tape, almost like sealing a treasure map. You'd ask your parents to mail it, or maybe sneak it into the mailbox yourself, hoping it would go unnoticed. And then came the wait. Weeks passed. Long weeks. But one day, there it was. A box, slightly too big for the mailbox with your name on it. You'd tear it open right there on the porch, fingers trembling. Inside, a dozen plastic cases with bold fonts and iconic cover art, each one full of songs you already knew by heart, or had only dreamed of hearing in full, uninterrupted. It was like Christmas, but you picked the presents. Of course, what Columbia House didn't advertise as loudly was the fine print. Those monthly shipments to follow, the price of forgetting to send back the little card, the surprise bills that appeared months later. But none of that mattered at first, because for that brief, golden moment, you held 12 albums in your hands, paid for with a single penny, and maybe a little luck. Some kids did it once. Some tried it again under a sibling's name, a cousin's. Even the family dog, if the mailbox didn't ask too many questions. And while the ethics may have been fuzzy, the feeling was clear. It was a loophole that felt like freedom. For a generation raised without streaming or instant downloads, owning music was a physical joy. You'd arrange the tapes in a shoebox, sort them by mood or artist, and play them through a Walkman until the ribbon began to warp. You'd memorize the lyrics from the little fold-out inserts. Some even copied the album art by hand, drawing it in notebooks or on the covers of school binders. Music wasn't just sound. It was something you held, something you shared, and something that made your world feel a little bigger. And Columbia House was part of that. Part wild deal, part rite of passage, part quiet rebellion against the limits of allowance money and the gatekeeping of record stores. Later, as you matured, you might look back and smile at how naive or clever it all was. But in the moment, it felt like hacking the system. Like beating the grown-ups at their own game. Like getting away with something that made your summer sound a little better. And when that cardboard box arrived, when you peeled away the shrink wrap and popped in that first tape, the world outside faded. You were somewhere else, somewhere louder, brighter, and deeply, entirely yours. After the thrill of receiving those 12 cassette tapes in the mail, music took on a new shape. Not just something you listened to, but something you watched. Something that lived and moved and danced across your television screen. And for an entire generation, that transformation had 3 simple letters. MTV. It began as a whisper. A few kids at school talking about a new channel, one that played music videos all day long. At first, not everyone had access. It was only available through cable, and not every household had taken that leap yet. But for those lucky enough, it felt like discovering a secret portal, a window into a larger, louder, more electrified world. "I want my MTV," the commercials chanted. Over and over, and we did, desperately. When it finally arrived, MTV didn't just change how people heard music. It changed how they saw it. Before, we only knew artists from their album covers or the occasional late-night talk show appearance. But now, we could see Cyndi Lauper dancing through surreal landscapes, or Michael Jackson transforming into a werewolf in the middle of the night. We watched Pat Benatar in leather, Prince in purple, Madonna in lace. It was rebellious. It was weird. It was brilliant. The television no longer belonged to just sitcoms or Saturday morning cartoons. It became a stage, blazing with lights, sound, style, and attitude. And in the background of bedrooms all across America, MTV played on loop, an endless rotation of music, fashion, and youthful energy. There was a rhythm to it. You'd turn it on after school, maybe while lying on your stomach on the carpet. The remote nearby. Notebook open, maybe pretending to do homework while Duran Duran videos flashed in the background. Or you'd leave it playing while you flipped through magazines, taped band posters to your wall, or sorted your new cassette tapes. MTV wasn't just entertainment, it was companionship. It taught you more than you realized at the time. You learned how music could be visual storytelling, how every look, every camera angle, every costume had a meaning. It gave birth to trends, haircuts, catchphrases, even dance moves that would be mimicked at school dances and sleepovers. Some of the videos were bizarre. Others were pure art. And once in a while, one would come along and stop you cold. A video so haunting or powerful that you'd sit still, just watching, the room around you going quiet. Parents didn't always get it. They'd poke their head in and raise an eyebrow at the volume, or mutter something about real music being on vinyl, but that only made it feel more personal. Ours, not theirs. And late at night, MTV could feel almost hypnotic. The glow of the screen, the low hum of bass, the flickering of neon lights on the wall. Even if you weren't fully awake, you'd leave it playing, letting the sounds and colors drift into your dreams. It was more than a music channel. It was a cultural lighthouse, guiding a generation through adolescence with eyeliner, electric guitars, and a little bit of eyeliner. And like most good things, the early MTV era didn't last forever. Eventually, the music gave way to reality shows, game shows, and scripted dramas. The M in MTV began to fade. But for those who grew up in its golden days, the days when VJs introduced the latest video, when you'd wait patiently to catch your favorite song, it was unforgettable. It was the moment when music stepped into your living room, looked you in the eye, and danced. Before kids had tablets or laptops to carry around, there were folders, simple, sturdy, and deeply personal. And in the 1980s, one brand stood out from the rest. Peachy folders. They weren't flashy at first glance. Usually a light brownish orange, hence the name Peachy, with a matte texture that felt slightly grainy under your fingertips. But what made them special wasn't how they looked fresh off the store shelf. It was what they became. Because for many kids in the 80s, a Peachy folder wasn't just school supply. It was canvas. It started with the images printed on them. Silhouettes of athletes in motion, a tennis serve, a basketball layup, a baseball player mid-swing. Stark, black line art that left plenty of space for imagination to grow. Some kids traced over the lines with black marker to make them bolder. Others used those blank areas around the figures like a stage, filling it with doodles, scribbles, declarations of crushes, or band logos carefully copied from record sleeves. Hearts were drawn, sometimes broken, sometimes pierced by arrows with a set of initials tucked safely inside. There were checkerboard patterns, peace signs, cartoon faces, and of course, names. Your own name, your best friend's, your favorite celebrity, or that kid in homeroom you hoped might one day notice you. The folder itself bent with time. The corners softened. The edges curled slightly. Sometimes a tear would appear near the spine, but instead of tossing it out, most kids just added a strip of tape, usually patterned or neon-colored, to hold it together. That only added to its character. It was your folder. Unique. Lived in. Every folder told a story. Not just of the school subjects it held, spelling tests, multiplication tables, essay drafts, but of the inner world of the kid who carried it. When class got dull, you'd open the folder just to stare at the cover. You'd trace the lines again with your finger. You'd dream. Some kids went minimalist, just their name written neatly in the corner and a single sticker, maybe from Lisa Frank or Garfield. Others went full maximalist, layering stickers, glitter pens, and entire comic strips cut out from the Sunday paper. A few folders had stickers half peeled and edges worn from being passed between desks or stuffed into lockers. Some had secrets written inside, little poems, phone numbers, song lyrics. It was personal expression in its purest form, before social media, before cell phones, before anyone thought to call it aesthetic. You could learn a lot about someone by their folder. Who they listened to, who they liked, what they were struggling with, sometimes even who they were becoming. During free periods or after school, you'd compare folders with your friends. You'd show off a new sticker you'd found at the mall, or a sketch you'd been working on in the margins of your history notes. Someone would add a Sharpie quote from The Breakfast Club, or a lyric from Madonna's latest single. And every new school year meant a clean slate, a fresh Peachy folder, unmarked, unbent, and full of possibilities. But there was always a touch of sadness in letting go of the old one. It had been there with you, through pop quizzes and playground drama, through boring lectures and secret notes passed in class. It had held not just paper, but a small piece of your childhood. Looking back, it's hard to say exactly why those folders meant so much. Maybe it was because they were something you could shape with your own hands, something no adult really controlled. Your parents bought the supplies, sure, but you decided what went on that cover. You turned it from something ordinary into something special. And even now, decades later, if you stumble across one in a box in the attic, creased and faded, the ink smudged and stickers peeling, you can't help but smile, because it's all still there. The heart-shaped doodles, the silly catchphrases, the band logos, the dreams. They speak of who you were in a language only you fully understand. And just for a moment, you're back in that desk, staring down at your folder, feeling like anything was possible. After decorating folders with hearts and band logos, self-expression didn't stop at the edge of your notebook. It extended to your sleeves, your cuffs, your socks, your very silhouette. And in the 1980s, perhaps nothing spoke louder on a playground than the way you wore your jeans. It wasn't about the brand. It wasn't about how new or faded they were. It was about how you rolled them. Pegged jeans. That was the name of the game. A ritual of folding and tucking and tightening the bottoms of your pants until they hugged your ankles like a second skin. You'd start with a sharp inward fold, just enough to flatten the fabric, and then roll upward, usually twice, maybe 3 times if you really wanted that crisp, narrow taper. It was part fashion, part statement, part childhood ceremony. And there was a right way to do it. Too loose and it'd unravel before lunch. Too tight and it looked like you were trying too hard. Some kids mastered it with a single flick of the wrist. Others needed help from a friend, kneeling in the hallway before homeroom to get that fold just right. The more precise it looked, the cooler you were. No one taught it formally. It spread organically, one kid showing another at recess, or copying what they saw on older siblings, or on shows like Saved by the Bell. The trend wasn't in magazines. It was in motion, on jungle gyms, basketball courts, and cafeteria benches. And it wasn't just the jeans. Fashion on the playground was its own secret language. Slouch socks, often layered 2 or even 3 at a time, were pushed down just right over high-top sneakers, usually Reeboks or LA Gears, preferably with blinking lights or neon laces. Graphic tees with cartoons, video game mascots, or glittery unicorns tucked perfectly into the waistband of those pegged pants, usually secured with a Velcro belt or a bright rubber snap. Windbreakers crackled with every movement, color-blocked in teal, purple, and electric orange. And there was almost always a comb sticking out of someone's back pocket, just in case that side-swept bang needed a quick fluff. But pegged jeans, they were the great equalizer. It didn't matter if you were the shy kid, the class clown, or the brainy one who sat in the front row. If you had your cuffs rolled just right, you belonged. You might not have known the latest pop lyrics or been invited to every sleepover, but with your jeans pegged properly, you could walk taller in the lunch line. You could show up to the roller rink on Saturday night and blend in like you'd always been part of the crowd. And oh, how they complemented the mood of that decade. The 80s were full of contrast. Structured yet colorful, loud yet deliberate. Pegged jeans were the same. They took something ordinary, something every kid wore, and turned it into a form of quiet individuality. Sometimes you'd add safety pins along the cuffs, either for decoration or to make sure the fold held during a full day of tag. Others used hairbands or even tiny stitches to keep the taper tight. And if your jeans weren't long enough to peg, well, you'd trade or beg for a hand-me-down that could do the trick. The hallway floor after the bell rang was a swirl of color and denim, light-up shoes and puffed sleeves. And amid that chaos, you'd spot the other kids who rolled just like you, fellow artists in the unspoken art of fashion. And even though trends would come and go, acid wash, suspenders, slap bracelets, pegged jeans were one of the first times many kids experienced style as identity. Not dictated by rules, not chosen by parents, not forced by uniforms, but something you chose, quietly, every morning before the bus arrived. Later, long after those jeans had been donated or outgrown, the memory of them remained. You'd see an old photo and smile at how tight your pant legs were, how exaggerated your cuffs looked, how confident you felt in something so small. And you'd remember the way it felt to crouch on the sidewalk with your friends, tucking in denim under neon socks, laughing at inside jokes, wiping Kool-Aid from your sleeve, and checking each other's folds to make sure they held before first period. Just kids figuring out who they were, one fold at a time. After the rolled cuffs and playground clicks, after the glow of MTV and the comfort of a well-worn notebook, came the school assembly. And not just any assembly. If you were lucky enough to be in elementary or middle school in the 1980s, chances are, one day, the usual routine of math drills and silent reading was interrupted by something altogether different, something that felt like a concert, a party, a movement. They called it a laser assembly. You'd first hear whispers in the hallway. They're setting up in the gym. I saw the speakers. They're huge. There's fog machines. The buzz would build all morning, and by mid-afternoon, a teacher would poke her head into the classroom with a clipboard and a smile. Line up, we're heading to the auditorium. And off you went. The gym was dark. Curtains drawn, bleachers pushed back. The air smelled faintly of varnished wood and anticipation. Up front was a strange setup, speakers stacked like monoliths, a projection screen, and, most magical of all, a control booth that looked like it had been borrowed from NASA. Lights blinked, dials spun, and as the chatter of sneakers on gym floors began to fade, the room fell still. Then, boom, music erupted. Not a school band, not a choir, but real music. Electric guitar riffs filled the room. Laser beams danced in perfect sync, cutting through fog and landing on the ceiling like stars gone wild. Neon colors zipped, spun, and pulsed, drawing gasps and cheers from the rows of wide-eyed students. It felt like a rock concert had come to your little school. There were no desks, no textbooks, no hand-raising or pencil sharpening, just lights, sound, and an energy that pulsed straight to the chest. The lasers would form shapes, eagles, lightning bolts, abstract bursts of color, and suddenly morph into spaceships or dancing skeletons. All of it set to the soundtrack of the moment. Van Halen, Michael Jackson, or even Survivor's Eye of the Tiger. You'd nudge your friend, eyes wide. "Did you see that?" They'd nod, speechless. For a few minutes, nothing else existed. But then, just when the rhythm had you completely pulled in, the lights would pause. The beat would soften, and the voice of the narrator would echo across the gym. Every choice you make shapes your future. Just like that, the tone shifted. A new segment would begin. One more reflective. The lasers dimmed, the fog cleared, and the message came in. Don't do drugs. Don't drink and drive. Stay true to who you are. Sometimes it was animated. Other times, a real story was told, paired with slow-moving lights and gentle music. Kids in the audience would quiet down, the mood sobering, thoughtful. For a few of us, those were the first real conversations we had with the concept of consequences. The first time we thought about the people we wanted to become. They called it edutainment. Education wrapped in entertainment. And it worked. Because the same lasers that drew gasps during rock songs now carried a deeper message. One about responsibility, friendship, and self-worth. And somehow, amid the pyrotechnics and pop, it all felt real. When the lights finally came back on and the bell rang, kids filed out slowly, quiet, blinking into the fluorescent hallway glow. Some still buzzing from the show, others lost in thought. A few were even moved to tears, and long after, you'd still hear people talk about it. Remember that one laser show? I still think about that story they told. It gave me chills. For all the bells and whistles, it wasn't about the lasers. It was about connection. Someone had come into your world, not through lectures or textbooks, but through color, sound, and emotion, and said, "You matter. Your choices matter." Looking back, those assemblies were more than just a break from class. They were emotional landmarks in childhood. Moments where the grown-up world whispered into the ears of kids, not as scolds or commands, but as reminders. You are seen. You are important. You have the power to choose a better path. And in that smoky gymnasium, beneath the beams of light, we believed it. After the fog and flicker of the laser assemblies faded, after the rock music and flashing lights gave way to the hum of hallway chatter and the creak of classroom chairs, life returned to its quiet rhythm. But tucked between multiplication tables and history lessons, there was always a moment of pause, an unspoken promise that something a little more magical might happen. A ritual that didn't require a stage or a spotlight. It only needed a quiet room, a few giggles, and 7 thumbs in the air. Heads up, 7 up. It wasn't a game you planned. It just happened. Maybe the teacher was out of lesson time. Or maybe the afternoon sun had made everyone too sleepy for one more worksheet. Either way, someone would say the words, "Can we play heads up, 7 up?" And suddenly the air changed. The lights would dim, just enough to give the room a dreamy hush. The blinds were drawn halfway. The fluorescent buzz overhead seemed to quiet down out of respect. And all across the classroom, heads would drop, arms would rise, and little fingers would curl into playful anticipation. 7 kids stood up front, hand-picked by the teacher, or maybe chosen by last round's winners. They tiptoed through the rows, trying not to laugh, shoes squeaking gently against the waxed floor. Tap, tap, tap. Each tap was a thrill, a secret code. If your thumb had been pressed, you didn't move, you didn't smirk, but inside your heart was thumping like a snare drum. Pick me. Let me be right. And then came the voice. Heads up, 7 up. Chairs scraped, heads lifted, eyes scanned the room. 7 kids stood still, arms behind their backs. Some nervous, some smug. And then the guessing began. One by one, the chosen tried to figure out who had tapped them. They'd point, the classroom would gasp, and someone, right or wrong, would grin. It was a small moment, but somehow it felt monumental. Because in that game, anyone could shine. You didn't have to be fast or tall or good at spelling. You just had to guess. Or, if you were the one walking quietly through the aisles, you just had to choose. There was strategy, of course. Some kids went for their best friends, knowing they'd laugh about it later. Others tried to be sneaky, tapping someone who'd never expected. The truly clever ones? They'd tap with the back of their finger or press a little harder, trying to leave a hint without leaving a mark. And the best part, it was utterly simple. No equipment, no scorekeeping, no technology. Just kids in a classroom playing a game that had been passed down like a secret handshake, generation after generation. Years later, you might not remember what was taught in social studies that week, or the details of the math quiz you crammed for. But you'd remember that one time you guessed right, or that one time you faked being asleep and still got tapped. It was more than a break from learning. It was a rare, perfect balance of suspense and silliness, of stillness and connection. Because for those few minutes, you weren't just a student. You were a participant in something oddly sacred, a moment where even the quietest kid could feel a little spark of spotlight, where the shy ones became the guessers, where the class clown tried, just for a second, to be subtle. And there was always laughter. Whether someone guessed right or wrong, it ended with smiles, with playful nudges, with the kind of joy that felt earned and innocent. When the game ended, the lights came back up. The desks straightened, the pencils returned to hand. But something lingered in the air. A little charge. A little warmth. And maybe, just maybe, the teacher gave a knowing smile. Because they remembered it too. They once sat with their heads down, thumbs raised, heart thumping in a classroom just like this one. After the last bell rang and the laughter of recess drifted away into memory, the days continued on, simple and sweet. And somewhere in the middle of it all, before the Saturday morning cartoons, before the bikes rolled into driveways and music filled the air, there was breakfast. And for a child growing up in 1980s America, breakfast wasn't just about food, it was about the hunt. Because hidden beneath those sugary flakes, those little corn puffs or frosted rings, was something far more important than the cereal itself. There, nestled deep in the cardboard box like buried treasure, was a prize, and that made all the difference. These weren't just toys, they were rewards. Tiny plastic rings that changed color in the sun, decoder tools with spinning dials and secret messages, stickers of your favorite cartoon characters, rubbery figurines of monsters, robots, or aliens that would glow faintly at night. They were silly, sure, but to a kid, they were priceless. The box itself told you it was in there, free inside. It screamed in bold colors and comic book fonts, and once you saw that, there was no going back. Some families had rules. You finish the cereal, then you get the prize. But, let's be honest, very few kids obeyed that noble code. Instead, the moment the box hit the kitchen table, the scramble began. One arm would plunge deep inside, elbow first, rustling and crunching through flakes and loops, ignoring the adult warnings of dirty hands and smashed cereal. The goal was singular. Find the prize before anyone else. And once you had it, oh, the pride. Holding up your little plastic Smurf or Ghostbusters sticker like you just won an Olympic medal. Your siblings groaned. You grinned. Sometimes the toys were cheap, breakable things. Sometimes they were surprisingly cool, like little puzzles or flip books or even tiny games with marbles that rolled between plastic pegs. It didn't matter what it was, really, because what made it special was when it came. First thing in the morning, when the world was still waking up, when you sat in your pajamas with one sock missing, feet swinging from a chair that was just a little too tall, the kitchen light humming softly overhead, the hum of a distant lawnmower outside, and that tiny treasure in your hand. There was something magical about those mornings. Maybe your mom was humming while she packed lunches. Maybe your dad had the newspaper open, sipping coffee. Maybe your little sister was still rubbing sleep from her eyes, her hair wild with bedhead. But you had the prize. You had won breakfast. And the cereal brands knew exactly what they were doing. They made the box feel like an adventure. Bright, busy illustrations wrapped around it like a comic strip. Maze games on the back. Trivia questions on the side. It wasn't just something to eat. It was something to explore. Some kids even kept the boxes, cut out the games, folded the cardboard figures, collected the toys in an old shoebox under their bed. Each prize a little memory. Each box a tiny chapter in a childhood well spent. And in some strange way, those little prizes taught us about hope. You never knew exactly what you were going to get. Sometimes it was what you wanted, sometimes not. But every morning there was a chance, a moment of wonder, a flicker of joy. Looking back, we barely remember the cereal. We remember the feeling of digging through something ordinary and finding something unexpected. The feeling of holding that cheap plastic ring in your palm and thinking, "This is mine." The feeling of knowing that today, no matter what happened at school, you started your morning with a tiny bit of magic. That was the beauty of growing up in the 80s. Even the smallest things, like a toy in a cereal box, had the power to shape your whole day. And maybe, just maybe, that's something worth remembering now. There was something about food in the 1980s that went beyond just eating. It was an experience, a ritual, wrapped in neon signs, red and white checkered tablecloths, and frozen trays with foil lids. For many American families, a night out didn't mean fine dining or reservations. It meant piling into the family station wagon, windows cracked just a bit, the air thick with laughter and the faint scent of vinyl seats, heading toward the glowing red roof that meant Pizza Hut. In the eyes of a child, Pizza Hut wasn't just a restaurant, it was magic. You walked through the doors and were greeted by the warm scent of melted cheese, buttery crust, and that unmistakable pepperoni spice. The air was dim but cozy, the lighting soft and tinted gold. Red glass candle holders flickered on each table, casting gentle shadows across laminated menus that doubled as coloring sheets. Booths were lined in dark faux leather. Waitresses wore aprons and carried pitchers of Pepsi like royalty. And the salad bar, was more about croutons and shredded cheese than actual greens. For kids, it was never about the salad anyway. It was about the pizza, thick, doughy, slightly greasy, and served in those heavy black pans that sizzled as they hit the table. And it was about the Book It program, a badge of honor for every child who had read their way to a free personal pan pizza. Some nights there'd be arcade machines near the entrance, Galaga, Pac-Man, or a pinball machine humming under colorful lights. You'd beg your parents for a quarter, then hover close, watching the older kids play until it was your turn. Pizza Hut was more than a meal. It was an event. It was birthdays with plastic crowns. It was team celebrations after Little League. It was the place where families gathered without distractions, where a pitcher of soda and a bubbling pizza meant you had arrived. And then, there were the nights at home. Not every evening was a night out. Often it was about comfort, simplicity, the kind of quiet only a microwave could bring. TV dinners, those futuristic silver trays divided into little compartments, were a staple in households across the country. With names like Hungry Man, Kid Cuisine, or Banquet, they promised a full meal without any cooking at all. The process felt almost ceremonial. You'd peel back the foil just slightly over the mashed potatoes. You'd listen to the microwave hum, watch the tray spin through the tiny window, and when it was done, you'd carry it carefully to the living room, still too hot to touch on the sides, and set it down on a TV tray table with fold-out legs. Dinner, in those moments, wasn't around a dining table. It was in front of the screen. Maybe it was the A-Team, maybe Cheers or Knight Rider. Maybe just a rerun of something you'd already seen 3 times. It didn't matter. What mattered was the glow of the television, the warmth of the tray in your lap, and the feeling that you were part of something bigger than yourself. That quiet, shared moment. Everyone watching together, not scrolling, not swiping, just being, was where the heart of the 80s really lived. Some nights the pizza was cold. Some nights the mashed potatoes tasted like cardboard. But the memory is warm. It's the jingle of utensils against foil. The way soda fizzed louder in the quiet living room. The feel of soft pajamas and carpet underfoot. The way your mom might ruffle your hair as she passed behind you, carrying her own tray. The way the world outside slowed down, if only for a little while. In the end, it wasn't really about the food at all. It was about being there. With your family, your TV, your favorite show, and that feeling that no matter how fast the world was moving, you had this one moment to hold still. Whether it was a bubbling pan of pepperoni in a red-roofed restaurant or a microwaved Salisbury steak eaten cross-legged on the floor, these were the flavors of childhood. These were the tastes of the 80s. And even now, if you close your eyes, you might just smell the melted cheese, or hear the quiet buzz of a VCR, or feel the warmth of something simple, something small, that once meant everything. As the neon fades and the echoes of laughter from the schoolyard settle into quiet memory, we come to the soft end of our journey through the 1980s. It wasn't just a decade of big hair, cassette tapes, and pizza nights. It was a time stitched together with moments that, while ordinary then, shimmer now with the glow of nostalgia. We began our story in the hush of early morning, the flicker of a television screen casting a soft blue light across the room. That buzzing screen wasn't just background noise, it was a kind of companion. A starting bell for the day, a soundtrack to cereal crunching and sleepy eyes. For so many of us, that screen opened a window into worlds far beyond our neighborhoods. From there, we peeked into red plastic Viewmasters and wandered through dinosaur jungles and outer space. We heard our toys speak to us for the first time, not just with sound, but with imagination. Speak and Spell and other blinking devices weren't just novelties. They were the beginning of a new language, one we'd later call digital. We carried our personalities zipped inside Velcro folders, trapper keepers that weren't just for papers but for self-expression. Colorful, noisy, bold, just like the decade itself. We recorded our favorite shows on blank VHS tapes, carefully pausing out the commercials, or sometimes keeping them in, not knowing that one day those jingles and old logos would become time machines of their own. We played the Oregon Trail and learned, with pixelated heartbreak, that life could turn on a dime. Dysentery, broken axles, river crossings, somehow it all stayed with us long after the floppy disks were gone. We called movie hotlines and scribbled showtimes, never imagining a future where any film, any time, could appear at the tap of a screen. Back then, anticipation was part of the magic. We gathered with our families for made-for-TV specials. No rewinds, no second chances, just one moment, one showing. And so, we leaned in a little closer, made the popcorn a little fresher, and shared the moment with those we loved. Public service announcements startled us between cartoons, searing messages into our memories. We didn't always understand them fully, but we remembered the frying egg, the shaking voice, the warning tone. Childhood, even in its lightness, had shadows that taught us things. And yet, Saturday mornings belonged to joy. Cartoons and cereal boxes. Characters that felt like friends. Heroes that felt like us. We made mixtapes with careful timing and eager fingers, learning the delicate art of patience. A well-crafted tape wasn't just a playlist, it was a love letter, a diary, a time capsule. We fell for the Columbia House deal, not knowing about the fine print, but who cared? 12 tapes for a penny felt like winning the lottery. Music flowed through our rooms like air. MTV arrived like lightning, bringing sound and color and movement into the corners of our imaginations. For the first time, we saw the music, and we danced with it. Even our school supplies carried flair, Peachy folders with scribbles and doodles, a canvas for young hearts. We rolled our jeans just so, hoping to get it right, hoping someone would notice, hoping we fit in. Assemblies became laser shows, and with them came messages. Don't do drugs. Make good choices. Be proud of yourself. Sometimes the music and smoke and flashing lights weren't just fun. They were lessons wearing sunglasses. And then there were the little things. The quiet games like Heads Up 7 Up that ruled recess. The plastic toys buried in cereal that turned a normal morning into a small celebration. The little rituals that only made sense in the moment, but feel sacred now. We ended with Pizza Hut nights and frozen TV dinners, two polar opposites that somehow represented everything we were. Celebration and convenience, joy and transition, the old ways and the new. And now we tuck those memories in, softly, gently. The 1980s weren't perfect. No time ever is. But for many of us, they were formative. A chapter of wide eyes and bigger dreams. A moment when the world still felt analog, tangible, real. If you're listening now, maybe you grew up then, or maybe you're just visiting. Either way, the door is always open. You don't have to go back to the 80s to feel them. You just have to close your eyes, listen to the hum of a distant TV, the snap of a trapper keeper, the crackle of a vinyl record, and remember what it meant to be a child in a world that was still figuring itself out. So, tonight, as the fire crackles and the vinyl hisses in the distance, let those memories wrap around you like a soft blanket. Let them whisper you into sleep. And know that somewhere in a box in the attic or a quiet corner of the heart, the 1980s still glow. Good night.